Hi everyone, welcome to Startup Playbook Hustle episode 10. I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and in this new segment of the podcast, I interview some of the best up-and-coming startups and entrepreneurs on their journey, lessons, and challenges to date. My guest for this episode is Byron Scaf, the CEO of Stile Education, which helps turn science textbooks and handouts into an online interactive curriculum. The business has been entirely self-funded to date, and since pivoting from a platform to a content play, have gone on to take on a significant chunk of the Australian market and are now about to expand internationally. In this episode, we cover a range of topics, including when you should pivot, when and how to expand internationally, and developing your hiring pipeline. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Hi Byron, welcome to the Startup Playbook Hustle, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here.
So for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your story, do you want to share a little bit about your background and what got you here today?
I guess like a lot of kind of people that have started their own business or started a startup or started up, as I like to kind of call it now, it was a long and winding journey. But essentially, you know, I did science at university. I did science all the way through school. I was the nerd that did 4 sciences and 2 math subjects going through VCE. And went through school, did neuroscience, but like all the way through didn't really understand, I didn't really understand why I was doing it or what the relevance was going to be to the real world. I mean, sure, you can become a research scientist, but apart from that, where does this really go? So I jumped out of academia and I went to a startup called Better Place, which was doing electric vehicle infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Super fun, raised $1 billion. It was one of the biggest clean tech raises ever globally at the time, and it was during the GFC as well.
Now, was that with Evan Thornley?
It was with Evan Thornley, yeah. And he was running initially he was running the Australian operation. He also briefly ran the global operation. But I was working for Alan Finkel, who was the CTO under Evan and is now Australia's chief scientist. And together we built Australia's first electric vehicle charging network, which is still, back in the day, was like, you know, there were literally no electric vehicles on the road. It's so good to see that it's changed now. So I did that for about 4 years, and that was my taste of startup. And it was probably the best introduction you could possibly have. Evan pulled together the most amazing team there. And I'm still in contact with most of them today. But when that wound up, I ended up starting Stile, which is what I'm doing today, with Alan. And you know, kind of Alan's essentially the driving force behind it. He was, at the time, as well as being CTO at Better Place, he was the Chancellor at Monash University. And he was seeing, I guess, you know, the lack of skill and ability of people coming into engineering and science degrees, people not being interested in coming into engineering and science degrees at the university level. And from my perspective, I was seeing this like, for the first time, I actually understood what this STEM thing was. I'd taken all my science skills and all my technology skills at Better Place and built a real thing for the first time. And I was excited about that. And so we decided that, you know, combined with what he was seeing, what I was seeing, it'd be fantastic to start something that actually helped kids realize this. He, as well, Alan's a little bit prolific. At the same time, he had a very successful science magazine, and still does, called Cosmos Magazine, with his wife, Elizabeth Finkel. That was doing great content for a general audience. And so we wanted to take that and combine it, I guess, or, you know, kind of teach the science behind that to kids at school. And that's what Stile is today.
Fantastic. So obviously, I've had Evan on the podcast. The Better Place story was incredible. If anyone's watching, listening, is interested in doing that, I'll make sure I'll link that episode into the show notes. But so talk me through, like, what was kind of the genesis of Stile, and what were those sort of early days of getting that off the ground?
So there were 4 of us. Alan had found a small team of people that were working at Monash University, we're students at Monash University, I should say, and we're building like a sort of learning management system style thing. And the reason why we were looking at that is we actually commissioned before we started the company, and we were kind of just working on the idea, commissioned some teachers to go and have a look at all of the kind of learning platforms that were out there. And we didn't want to create a learning platform. We just wanted to deliver great science content. But certainly at the time when we were starting it, there was nothing out there that was accessible or that could be used by a teacher that didn't have a technical background. You know, Alan's a kind of entrepreneur, Silicon Valley entrepreneur from way back. He's an engineer himself. He's like, oh, let's just build the thing. And so we started going down that path. You know, he found these engineers. They had a basic system in place. We started iterating and building on that. And we created the science content on that very, very basic platform. And we took it to some schools. We knew some school teachers. We took it to some schools, and they really liked it. And something happened that we didn't expect that led us on a wild goose chase that actually lasted about 3 years. They really liked the platform. So they loved the science content, but they really liked the platform because for the first time, they could create, with just a point-and-click interface, their own lessons, their own digital lessons, and deliver it to kids in their class. And this was particularly relevant because this was just as the kind of RUD money for schools was flowing through for, you know, how, you know, iPads were bought for all these schools, and there was a massive building program during the GFC and all that sort of thing. So it was really relevant. And we said, oh, maybe we should sell this platform. And so we started, we said, okay, we've got the science content over here, and we're going to start selling a learning management platform to schools. And we did that for about, like I said, about 3 years. And it was modestly successful. It was popular amongst some of the, you know, kind of bigger private schools. But it was, in hindsight, a complete distraction from what we started out wanting to do. And, you know, it was just, I couldn't believe that, like, looking back on it now, it's kind of hard to believe that happened, but it didn't. It seemed like the right decision at the time. And the science content thing, it kept bubbling along on the side, but we were kind of ignoring it. It was kind of the, you know, the kind of little brother. It was off to the side. We didn't think about it. Alan then, I remember Alan coming to me one day, a few years ago now, and he's like, oh, I've been nominated as the Chief Scientist of Australia, which he was really excited about, and so was I. But of course it meant that he had to leave everything he was doing in the corporate sector and the private sector to take on this government role. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what are we gonna do? One of the guys that I run the business with, who's amazing, Daniel Pickler, and I, a couple of months later, went over to London. We went over to London to go to the huge conference over there called BET, which is an education technology conference. And we wandered around, like, we don't do conferences here very well. Like, we wandered around this conference for 3 full days, and we didn't walk the entire floor. And we were sitting in a bar afterwards, having a cocktail, and, you know, kind of in Shoreditch, really cool. And we're just like, there's nothing there that's like core science, that's teaching kids, you know, the interesting stuff around science. There's plenty of robotics, there was plenty of coding, but like, where's the science? And we're like, hang on a second, we've got this amazing science content. The platform's really, really hard to sell. And this is not what we started out wanting to do. And it's not what we're passionate about. We're passionate about science and STEM education. Why don't we just flip this whole thing on its head and go back to where we started? Literally over a drink. So we came back to Australia and we're like, all right, let's pivot the business. Let's go back into the core thing that we wanted to do. Let's go back into science education. And we did that. It was a huge job. And it's huge because you have to turn around your entire staff, your entire operation. Everything has to be rebuilt from the ground up. But it instantly took off. And from, you know, in a period of 18 months, we went from in barely any school to in over 1 in 4 schools in the country, secondary schools.
I mean, it's what you just mentioned of, you know, a 3-year kind of wild goose chase. I feel like there's so many different startups and founders that do that, especially when, as you mentioned, you know, you've got some level of of validation from customers saying, oh, this platform is great.
Right.
You've got some customers, you've got some revenue. But I guess one of the things that I've kind of really learnt is what you just mentioned about the difficulty of selling. When you have something that kind of works, it just works, and you can feel it. And as you mentioned, you've gone from not zero, but the level of growth that you've achieved since you've had that pivot has been tremendous, and it just kind of works. For anyone that's kind of going through that phase, or I guess even for you from going through that process, was there? I know you were at the conference and you kind of saw these opportunities, but was there anything that kind of instigated that for you, or made you kind of take that step back to go, you know what, this actually wasn't what we sort of started to do, and there is this kind of gap in the market? Because it is a pretty aggressive pivot from let's sell the platform to let's sell content.
Yeah, I think it was the two-stage thing. It's like, honestly, Alan was leaving the business to do the thing that he wanted, to pursue this new opportunity. Just a fantastic opportunity. And I think personally, I'm probably biased, but I think he's doing a phenomenal job as Australia's chief scientist. It was that, and it was like, we were left with the business then. It was kind of like, it was on me and it was on Danny. And we were kind of given a certain amount of money and said, you got to make it work. And I'm looking at this amount of money and I'm going, holy shit, we can't build the thing we were going to build with this amount of money. It's gonna roll off, the edge of the cliff. We're just going to roll off the runway. What do we do? So we were facing that when we left for London. And I think, this ties into something else that I'm very passionate about. You have to get away from your business sometimes. The office is the worst place you can be to do this kind of thinking. I love going away with, kind of our senior management team, even just going away with one other person. And it's important when you go to these international conferences that you do take a colleague. Don't go by yourself. You need the person to bounce the ideas off of, and it's where the best stuff happens. And you will be sitting in a bar and you'll go, oh, like this is crazy, but I think this is what we're going to need to do, and it's been those sorts of conversations, with your, essentially co-founder, that makes that they're the moments,
Yeah. I mean, we so for the Playbook media team, we just did a team offsite a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Best thing that we've done, just to kind of get the entire team to step away from the office and
How good
have
is
a look
it?
at the bigger picture. And I think we were just speaking just before we turned on the microphone as well. You just got back from a holiday from Canada. I just got back from Bali again. It can be so difficult for people to take that step away, especially when things aren't working, that it seems like counterintuitive to go, actually, I should be focusing more time and more energy, and more things need to happen. But often that's the worst decision that you can do, and it's important to take that step back.
Yeah, and it's going to feel awful at the time. When Danny and I, in those very those were still the hard days when Danny and I decided that we needed to go to that conference and check it out. And I actually know some of our staff privately, they weren't saying it to us, but they were saying it. It's like, why are they, kind of running off overseas, spending all this money? And, anytime you leave the country, it costs a lot of money. We're in Australia. To do this when we've got bigger problems back home, we shouldn't be looking at that. And you've kind of got to overcome that in your own head and go, no, you know what, this is actually important. And people often ask you, okay, what are you trying to get out of going? You want to do this thing. What do you want to get out of going? What's the value that you're going to bring back? And it's impossible to answer before you go. But going to big, relevant trade conferences with one other person is not about, you might see some cool businesses and some cool ideas, but you're going to see the gaps in the middle of those ideas where the opportunities are. Or you're just going to spend the time not in the office, not dealing with the day-to-day, putting out that fire, dealing with this thing, writing that email. And it's going to give you the headspace to think about the bigger picture and go, oh, you know what? I'm actually not passionate about this angle, but I'm really passionate about that angle. That's what we need to pursue. We just need to run at it and run at it hard, and you recharge.
So tell me what's the next step? So you come back from a trip away to Europe and you go, you know what, we decided over a drink that we're going to pivot the entire business. How do you get buy-in, and how do you get the rest of the team to buy into that?
The first thing we did is Danny and I left the rest of the team doing exactly what they were doing, and we went out and hit the road and did a bit of market research. So we went and knocked on doors. We were lucky by then. We had kind of relationships with customers and schools, obviously. We went and spoke to the heads of science, the people that we knew we'd be wanting to sell to, and we said, effectively, if we had something that looked like this, this, and this, is that something that would be interesting to you? And you're kind of like, how much do you reckon you might pay for it? Just like really carefully feeling it out. And we did a whole bunch of that. We probably did that for about a month to prove up some of the ideas that we had in our head before we started talking to the wider team and going, hey, so I know we're doing this, but what do you think if we did this? And just started getting buy-in. But it is a long process. You need to proactively, once you've decided to do it, you've made that call, it's ongoing, constant proactive communication. One of my favorite sayings it's from Mark Horstman from managertools.com, who's is one of the best resources if you want to learn more about people management. If you've said it 7 times, half your people have heard you. It is so true in my experience. You should feel as a leader like a broken record on the new thing you're doing and why you're doing it. And eventually, you're going to meet with people one-on-one. You've got to get everybody over the line and make sure they're with you. It's a big task. You've got to paint the picture. You've got to paint the vision. Absolutely.
In terms of seeking validation, so again, this can be a tough one to gauge. But like, how many, what was it that you were seeking for in terms of validation when speaking to the science students? So was there a specific number of conversations? Was there a specific number of yeses? Like, what was it that you said, okay, you know what, like, we're actually onto something here?
I guess the first thing we were looking for is, do you actually want to, replace your textbooks with a more modern alternative that's more engaging for kids? And what package does that kind of form? What are the things that would be important to you about that? What are the things that you don't care about? And these were they weren't, especially the first ones, weren't particularly directed conversations. But as you start doing them, you start building up a bank of questions that you find quite interesting that you can test with people. Do you actually even use the textbook? So all your students have a textbook, what do they use it for? Like, actually, it turns out we don't really open it. But we like knowing it's there. So what you're looking for, I guess, product validation and trying to understand what the exact package needs to look like, which is what you would do if you were starting from the very beginning anyway, right? So I think you just go back to square one, and you talk about what it is, you show them like something packaged that you do have, which we literally just throw together on our platform, and we're like, and it's going to be, I don't know, $30 a kid. Look for the reaction, read the face. Oh, that wasn't too bad. Okay, cool. And I would say probably 10 to 12 of those sorts of conversations, and you start to get a very good sense of whether you've got something. And then we basically built something out with the bits that we had. So we had the platform, we had some of the content, we packaged it into a single kind of offering, and started pitching it to people, and got a really good reaction. One of the things that is difficult with that you need to keep in mind is if you've built a brand around something else, which we had around a platform, you will run into trouble with that if you don't very explicitly explain to people what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that was one of the mistakes that we made. We could have been more explicit. We were known by e-learning coordinators in schools as a platform. And so if they already had a platform, they didn't want another one. If you take MathSpace or something like that, who is known for just maths, and they're a curriculum replacement or a curriculum substitute for maths, it's easy. Then you're not a platform, you don't have to worry about it.
I just want to come back onto branding, but one of the things that I just kind of wanted to hone in on was the way that you ask those questions as well is critically important. So the number of founders that I've seen go into a sales meeting or trying to validate their idea and start off with, this is our idea, this is our solution, would you buy this? Versus the approach that you took, which was, are you even using your science books, or how are you using these? What you're looking for is actually trying to extract that information, helping them get to the solution versus trying to force that solution down their throat, because that isn't a very effective way of actually doing market research.
Oh, absolutely. The customers, it's like the old adage, like they can't necessarily tell you exactly what it looks like, what they want, but they know what their pain points are. And if you ask them, they can sometimes imagine a vision of the future. And you take all of that over the course of those conversations and you start building an idea in your head of what it could be. We had an idea of what it looked like, but we didn't reveal that in conversations necessarily until the end of the conversation. And that means, by the way, that you can kind of customize your pitch exactly to what they need. And then you go away and build it.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming back onto branding, I mean, one of the conversations that I've had with a lot of early stage B2B founders is, we're afraid that if we go out with something, especially to a B2B audience, and it isn't quite right, it's very difficult for us to come back from that and do that. So I guess kind of in a similar sense where Stile had been branded as a platform, and now you're trying to rebrand yourself as a content play. What was that process like for you in terms of breaking past that previous brand that you have to now establishing yourself in that new space and selling to the same audience?
Like I said, I don't think we did the best job of it, to be perfectly honest. And some of our very early customers, we had to come back and pick up again later. Once we had the social proof around what the new brand kind of was. We're at the point now in our market where the customers, the teachers themselves, are the ones that are actually talking about our product. And that forces people to have another look. But especially in EdTech, especially in schools, that cycle can be really, really long. And to be honest, I'm sure it exists in the corporate world as well. A really good example of that is what I think is actually quite a good product in the EdTech space now. It's called ClickView. It's in a lot of schools in Australia. But for a long time, or kind of 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even more now, they had some reliability problems with their platform. And people still know about that. It's unbelievable. And it's taking them, they're doing it's kind of now that people, kind of the ecosystem talks to each other, the customers talk to each other, and people are having another look, and it's a great product. It takes time. So we were lucky in the sense, I suppose, that we made the decision early enough that we didn't quite have enough customers that we were able to go and do everyone else and then come back and circle around the ones that really knew us for something different.
Sure. And again, you kind of just touched on this as well, but especially in your market where I guess the end user of your product isn't necessarily the person that you sell to. So, your end user are students and teachers, but you're essentially selling to schools. What's the approach that you take, or how do you sort of sell that into schools?
There are a lot of influences in the decision-making process at school, and it is more difficult than corporate. What people tend to forget about schools is that, while we sit in meetings all day between kind of 8:30 and 5, they're actually performing their service function between 8:30 and 3:30. And so their meetings where they actually make decisions about what to do next happen after school. They happen in the worst possible time, first of all. They tend to happen by committee, and they don't happen very often because there's just not many hours in the day for it to actually take place. So a purchasing decision at a school is a tough thing. And the more people, kind of the bigger your offering is to a school, the more parts of the school that you touch. The people, kind of selling full-on learning management and school management systems will tell you this. It is a huge process to sell. We simultaneously talk to a whole bunch of different audiences. We talk to the teachers, we talk to the head of science, we talk to the bursar, we talk to the IT person, and we have a kind of now very well-defined process of when we engage with those different players in the sales process. But we had to work it out by trial and error. And you don't get it right the first time, and you learn pretty quickly. It doesn't help that it's also pretty different from school to school. So, our sales team are now really good at identifying who those people are and making sure we've spoken to them at the right time. One of the things that we really badly underestimated was the power of students in the decision-making process. And I think this is really important for anybody that's venturing into the K-12 edtech space. So we figured, we kind of had an older mental model, which is, back when we were at school, I don't remember ever having any agency over what textbook I was using in any class. This was the textbook that the teacher had chosen, and you're going to use it. That was the paradigm. Mm. It seems with digital products that students not kind of saying we don't like this, we don't want to use it, actually does have a lot of sway. It cuts a lot of sway at the school because frankly, things that the kids do want to use, it's easier to convince them to do the work. And I think schools have to walk a very, very fine line there because, it's kind of like the candy versus broccoli argument, right? You can create a very gamified experience for kids, but are they actually doing the learning and the thinking that they need to be versus just making classroom management a bit easier? So that's the thing. But as vendors, as people wanting to, kind of sell products to schools, we need to recognise that it's an important audience and the product needs to work really well for them, not just for the teacher.
Okay. So you recently decided to expand out into the international sort of market. So again, from a startup perspective, it can be really hard to understand when is the right time to do that, and also what's your approach that you're taking.
It's never when you want it to. It's never when you want it to be, and that's probably the right time, if that makes sense. I've been really lucky at the board level. Both Evan Thornley, who's on the board, Tim Power, who's done EdTech international expansion before, have really gone, yeah, let's do it. And so have the management team behind me, which is great. You have to do, if you're a B2B SaaS business in Australia, I think it really needs to be on your radar pretty quickly. It's a really small market. If we'd started this business in the US and we had the amount of customers that we have today, we'd only just be getting started. You might be taking a round of funding to just scale your sales team nationally and really go for it. At kind of 30% of the Australian market, you've got two options: you create another product or you take your product overseas. Really. So, to be frank, if you don't, you're going to get beaten by scale by someone who's doing it somewhere else, who's already got enough market and therefore enough revenue to reinvest in product and all of that sort of thing. For us, we're quite lucky. Our content's quite portable in the English-speaking market. We don't have to make too many changes to go overseas. And what we're looking for when we evaluate international markets, which is basically where we're at right now, we're okay, where's next, is the usual things that you would think of. It's what's going on in those other markets, who's playing, who's not playing, what's their technology adoption like, what are they used to paying, what's their price sensitivity, all of those sorts of questions. And I think the important thing from my perspective is don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Agree on a level of stuff that you're going to look at. Do your desk research. Spend a week on the internet. Have a look at what's going on. Make some, kind of pick up the phone, call your network, get introductions to people in those markets that you can talk to that are in your sector, so you can, kind of ask all the relevant questions. Make a decision and get over to that market. We're just in the process of doing that now. So, in the next few weeks, Danny and I will be off, and we literally think what we're going to do is start the whole process again from the very beginning, knocking on doors, talking to people, learning all of the lingo, the language. It's all subtly different. You can't just roll out your Australian sales model into another market. You need to learn it again.
Sure. Exciting. Looking forward to having you back potentially in some time to hear how that process went for you. So I recently caught up with Lawrence, who's your kind of head of marketing as well.
Yep.
Really fascinating guy. Who's working at a really successful startup in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And decided to jump ship and join Stile. One of the biggest things that kind of keeps coming up through the podcast is how hard it is to find and attract the right talent for your startup. Again, from your perspective, how do you attract someone like Lawrence, especially when they're at a position that they're doing really well to leave that, jump ship and join you?
Yeah. So you're so right. Talent is a really difficult one. And it's not on Seek. Sometimes you get really lucky because people happen to be looking at LinkedIn and you're advertising something and, it's the right place at the right time and they had a bad day at work that day and they reach out to you. But really, you have to go after the talent that you want. And really, that's where you spending a great deal or more time than you think you should building your network and just talking to people. That's where that really starts to pay off, because you start going, okay, we need a new head of marketing. Who do we know? I had worked with Lawrence before, again, at Better Place. And I was sitting again with Danny, having a whiskey in the office this time. This was a regular thing, still is. And going, oh God, we need somebody that just has that real drive, that real hustle. And we need to start covering off some of that marketing and operations stuff. We've got to get it off our plate so we can work on product, so we can work on sales. He had met Lawrence once before as well. I'm like, it's someone like Lawrence. Like, we just need someone like that. And he's just like, why don't we get Lawrence? And I'm just like, he's not going to come home, man. It's like he's at this great startup in New York. Is it like a unicorn startup? It's going super well, still is. And I'm just like, well, how are we going to do it? And he's just like, why don't we just go to LA? Or why don't we just go to New York and have a chat to him about it? And I had one thing up my sleeve, to be honest. Trump had just been elected. So that was certainly part of the sell. But we just literally the next week booked a ticket to America, him and me, flew over there and... Specifically. And that's actually not a small part of the sell. I'd been talking to him about who does he know, would he be interested for probably the best part of 6 to 9 months beforehand. And it had always been a pretty firm no. I'm really happy in New York. I'm not done in New York. I've got a girlfriend in New York. No. I've got a huge marketing budget. It's like an up and coming company. So rocking up, I think, made a big impression. It was like, we're serious. We just flew across the world because we want to work with you. And the pitch is, we're going to you're going to run marketing and we're going to build this thing that's going to be a global education company. But we can't do it without your help, and we need you to come. We need you to build a team. So it was an opportunity for him. It was he's got a much smaller marketing budget by a very, very long way, possibly like 1 to 2 orders of magnitude than he did at Oscar. But the difference is, like, he has the chance to be, far more influential as part of the senior management team. So you're offering somebody a step up. You're communicating to someone that you're serious about rocking up, and you don't take no for an answer.
Which is also what he told me. But yeah, no, I think again, it's really, really fascinating. I think one of the things that's often overlooked is people say, we don't have, do we just offer them a higher salary? Do we offer them more things? But it's more honing into what does that person actually want out of their career, and so kind of tapping into that opportunity for him to have a larger role into kind of the senior management and the decision making is really important for particular people at particular stages in their career. It's really important to understand that, but also how you the impression that you made in terms of going out there is actually a really big step. And so it's not so much about can we offer them the biggest package, but really like what are the lengths that you're willing to go to, and how important do you want to make them feel, because they will be an important part of your team.
And I think ultimately we were able to bring Lawrence around to the point of view that fixing education, of which he personally, didn't have a great experience at, and he'll tell you this openly, at secondary school. Fixing education was ultimately more important than healthcare. It was more important than insurance, which is what he was working in. And healthcare in America is a very important problem to solve, don't get me wrong. Extremely important, but this tapped into something more for him. And I think, kind of that's the point you're making, and it's so important. The package won't matter for the right person. You do hear these stories from time to time, people taking epically big pay cuts. I've had some of these conversations with, some really great startups in Silicon Valley. They're like, we can't believe this person works for us, but they are so invested in our mission that, they could have been leading a team of 5,000 people at Samsung, but they're here with the 16 of us because they believe it. That's like the power of that trumps everything else. Because ultimately, why are you getting up in the morning? You're not beyond a certain amount of money, you can have it doesn't matter. But what matters is doing something that you actually believe in. God, that sounds so cliche, but it's just true.
It's true, but it's true for certain people. It won't necessarily work for everyone. So not everyone might believe what you believe, but for the people that do buy into this and do have the same belief system, they'll be willing to go to those sort of lengths as well. So it's about sort of finding the right person who also matches that.
Yeah,
that matches critical. But again, really, for I guess anyone who's going through that process at the moment, what were the characteristics that you were looking for? So you mentioned that you were looking for someone like Lawrence, but something that I've kind of learned from my own startups is that hiring is just an ongoing process. You're always looking for people, and there are kind of some of the incredible people that I have in my team. I just try and replicate. How do I find the exact same person in a slightly different role with a slightly different skill set? What are the characteristics that you look for, or what are the things that you look for when you're trying to look for people or build up that network with hiring in mind?
We have this kind of massive matrix of skills that we look at when we're actually in the hiring process with people. But what I love seeing in people and what I look for in people are traits that I think are pretty hard to change and learn. So there's a lot of stuff that people can learn. I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in people that are really driven, they're resourceful, they are quick learners, so they can pick up something and really get into it. But I think it's also important from a personality perspective. It's really easy to hire people that are like you. And it's actually a bit of a trap. You really have to very critically evaluate what are the attributes that are going to make them fantastic at that role. Think about that. You have to write them down, and then think about the types of people who might fit into those categories. If you just hire people that you like to have a beer with, everybody loves the beer test, you're going to get a lot of copies of yourself. I don't think you're going to get very diverse thinking. And I think that is long-term an issue for a company that you need to be thinking about in the hiring process.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I think it's really important to be very similar in terms of the values, but in terms of hiring for Playbook Media, I look for people that are the complete opposite of me. So yeah, nice. I'm super unstructured, super creative, but I need people who can actually be very operational and get things done, because I'm terrible at that. And so we would just never get anything done if I just hired people that were exactly like me. So, but that kind of shared value of growth and wanting to learn and just doing things is something that we need as a team. So I think it's where that sort of complementary balance comes in of shared values, but diversity in skill set or approach.
Yeah, and I think one way you can think about it too is do you know how to teach someone to be driven? Do you know how to teach someone to just scrap and be resourceful, which is something that you absolutely, as you know, need at a startup. You just need to figure it out and get it done. Looking for those qualities mean that looking for things that you can't reasonably teach someone, or somebody can't reasonably learn, or you've never seen someone really, in your experience, change from the opposite to that, it's a really good place to start.
Yeah. Really curious to know, how do you test that? Because I know for some people you can kind of, for me anyways, I can see it in their behavior, and ideally I try and tie it to something that's happened previously in their career. So really getting to, again, for me it's a long process of trying to get to know someone.
Yeah.
But is there any way that you kind of test that hunger or learning or just ability to get stuff done?
You're right. You do sometimes just know, but it's always, the answer to these questions is in past behaviour. That's the only way you can know for sure. So apart from, them, you can tell, there are people that are extremely active in the community that have done a whole bunch of things that you can see that that's a clear thing. But what we do structurally during our interview process, once we go through, is we do one part of our interview process is very long. It takes about 3.5 hours. It's called top grading. There's a great book with the same name that I recommend to anybody that's hiring. And it walks you through this process of going all the way back to their school education, right the way through every single job they've ever had. And you ask them a series of questions about those things where you are looking specifically for these qualities. It's like, where have they taken initiative? Where have they been resourceful? When the chips have been down, what have they done? And when you go through somebody's job history, especially if they've had about 3+ jobs, and even back at school and university, when you get them to talk about it, you very quickly establish patterns. I actually interviewed one amazing young woman who unfortunately didn't end up working for us. Thank you, big tech companies in Melbourne. But she actually came out of that interview process. She's like, I actually know things about myself now that I didn't realize through the patterns we found in that. It's a very powerful interviewing technique. It should be one part of your hiring process, in my opinion. Top grading, check it out.
Definitely will do. Mindful of time, because I know you've got a meeting to get to. But just final question as well. So I think one of the things that's really helped me with the hiring process, or even decision making, like you mentioned this earlier, where you've got a set budget and you've got to or a timeline or some form of constraint that you've got to work to. One of the things that I've loved about companies that I've started of bootstrapping things, or in agency setting where there's no external funding and you can't just go on a hiring spree just for the sake of it. It helps me to kind of nut down specifically what we're looking for. You've also had a kind of a similar approach in terms of bootstrapping style to this date, essentially self-funded and internally. But I guess again, curious to kind of understand your approach or your kind of thoughts on bootstrapping versus going out and raising funding.
Yeah, I have a bit of a, it's probably not fair to call us bootstrapped in that kind of traditional sense, in that we were funded very well, and in some cases almost too well. That's a whole nother topic. But I feel this thing, particularly in the Australian community at the moment, the Australian startup scene, and it's being driven by the venture capital groups themselves, who are often backing a lot of the big startup incubators at the moment, that kind of raising money is like earning your stripes. And it's the only way that you can be successful in a startup. And I think people know logically that that's not true, but this is the overwhelming message that's being I feel that's being given to me. And when I go to demo days at the end of incubators, and I hear people that are they're doing $300,000 a month, they've got 4 people working for them, and they're standing there and asking for venture capital, and I'm like, really, can you please have a very good think about whether you need it or not? And what you're actually buying into, because you speak to, particularly I had the pleasure of meeting quite a few of the big venture capitalists last year when we were doing a raise, and they will tell you, it's you need to adopt our business model, and our business model is that we need you to go basically 100x or broke, and we need you to do it in 5 to 6 years, depending on where their fund is running to. That might not be the best thing for your business long term, and it might not build the business that you ultimately want to run and that you're proud of. So I encourage founders to think about other ways.
Absolutely. It's I'm I'm a huge proponent of that as well. Like with Stage Label, we turned away funding 3 times, and a lot of people find that really weird.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like we were ready for funding, but also I think that puts you on a particular path as well. And if that's not the path that you want to pursue, then you shouldn't be going out to raise funding. It's as you mentioned, it's not your only option of ways to kind of build a business.
Totally
so,
not.
Definitely recommend doing your research. Byron, thanks so much for coming on. Great to chat, and obviously looking forward to hearing Stile's continued growth, both here and overseas. For anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn's always a favourite way, but styleeducation.com, you'll find me pretty easily.
Perfect. And part of the Hustle series is, I launched this new segment of the show just to try and find ways to better connect startups and the listeners at home. So every guest that comes on gets to ask a question of the audience. So if there's anything that people can help you with, whether that's you're looking for a particular hire or anything in general, what ask would you have?
I'll have to plug our latest hire. I'm looking for a CFO or head of finance is what it's advertised right now. Somebody that wants to jump into this and help us go international, help us look after all of the, you'll be responsible for everything related to money and finance at Stile. We're late to the party on that hire, and I'm super excited about some of the people I've spoken to so far. But if the audience knows anyone that might fit that category that wants to get into startup, please let me know.
Cool. I'll make sure we include that. Byron, once again, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Pleasure having you. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back shortly with another episode, but in the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest interviews. Thanks for watching.